everyone, welcome back to our UIKit series, and today we're taking a look at animations. Animations are more than just aesthetics. They enhance the user experience by guiding users and providing feedback. So UIKit does provide the simple UIView.animate for basic animations, but today we're diving a little bit deeper. We're going to be covering Keyframe Animations for complex motion, UIViewPropertyAnimator for fine grain control, CoreAnimation for high performance transitions, gesture-driven animations, the one I was kind of showing off here, for interactive UIs, as well as performance tips and reusable animations. So if these sound like things you want to include in your app, let's go ahead and dive on in. So I'm going to create a new project, but always feel free to add this to an existing one. I call this one Animations Example UIKit. Make sure we're on storyboard, language Swift, no testing or storage needed. So the first thing we're going to be doing is creating a keyframe animation for some precise motion control. So instead of moving an object smoothly from point A to point B, we define multiple waypoints for a custom path. So let's go ahead and create a new file from template. And because this is going to be a view controller, we can actually use the Cocoa Touch class here under the kind of main sources of Swift files. Hit next, and let's go ahead and call it Keyframe View Controller. Hit next. If you want to create an XIB file for it as well, I'm just going to be using the storyboard to kind of show all of these off. Alrighty, so we already have this conforming to a UIView controller, wonderful. And let's go ahead and have an animated button. So let's go ahead and define that. We'll say animated button. And this is going to go ahead and equal a UI button. And for the type, let's go ahead and have this be .system. Close off that bracket. In our override function, view did load. Let's have a setup function here, and underneath that, let's go ahead and create that function of setup minor brace. And from here, we're going to access our animated button. We're going to set the title. Let's just call this one tap me. And for the for statement, we're just going to have this be normal. We're also going to add a frame. If you really wanted to use your custom UI buttons from the previous video, feel free to do so. We're going to have a CG rectangle here. Let's have an X, Y, width, and height and all that. Let's have this one be 100 by 300, and the width of 120, and then the height we can do 50. We can always change this later if we really want to. And here's where we're going to be adding our animation. So we're going to, once again, reference our animated button, and we're going to add a target. And I'm going to use the autofill, the add target. And here, the first option is going to be self, so the button itself. And for the action, we're going to use the hashtag selector. And I'm going to use the autofill with the Object-C method. So within this bracket, we're going to reference start animation. Now this is the function we're going to be creating in just a few seconds. And then the for, we're going to do the dot touch up inside. So this is the event where the finger of the user is placed inside the bounds of the control. There's tons of different events here. Because it's a button, touch up inside makes the most sense. When the user presses inside the button, we want this to kind of happen. And then in the view.add subview, we're going to make sure that the animated button is being displayed to the users. Okay, let's create that function now. And instead of just writing func, we're actually going to do @objc. And this is really important for when we're doing these extra animations. Then we'll just do our function start animation, make sure it's spelled the same way, nothing within the parameters, and we're going to add a brace. So this is where we're going to get into the keyframes of really adding these really custom animations that take your app from, yeah, just pretty cool to really, really amazing. Our UIView.animate keyframes. So we have a few different options here. I'm going to go ahead and select this second one so we can really customize the animations, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this, we're going to be moving the Y value and kind of moving it back down. So I'm going to select the middle one here. And so for the width duration, how long is this animation going to take? Set this one to be 1.5, 1.5 seconds. I don't want a delay on this one, but you can, of course, feel free to experiment as much as you'd like. For the options, I don't want to have any of these options. I'm just going to fill it by including a blank array, so those blank square brackets. And for the animations here, this is where we're actually going to be adding a brace. And here's where we're going to add our different animations. So we're actually going to start this one with a moving of the button up. Then we're going to move the button back down, and we're going to add a small bounce effect. So to add our moving of the button up, we're going to do UIView.add keyframe, just singular on this one. Notice the other one, keyframes. This one's just going to be keyframe, and we're going to use the autofill feature here. So with relative start time, this is going to be 0.0. I want this one to happen right away. The relative duration, let's set this one to be 0.3. We can play around with it after. And for the animations, since we're already kind of dealing with this, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this autofill. I just want to have the start time and the duration. Outside of this bracket, we're going to go ahead and add a brace, and this is where we're going to reference the self.animated button transform, and this is where we're going to be handling the movement. We're going to do CG affine transform, and within these brackets here, we're going to have our translation X. I only want this button to move up and down, so I'm just actually going to put this to 0, and then the Y, I'm going to set it to -50, so this should kind of move it up 50 little spots. So just slight animation, but that's totally fine. After this brace, we're going to kind of be continuing what we're doing in order to move the button back down. So UIView.add keyframe, relevant start time. Let's have this one be 0.3. The duration, let's play around with this number, maybe 0.4. Always feel free to come back and change these. I'm also going to be getting rid of the animations here. Add our brace after, self.animated button transform. You can do other things than transform, of course. And we're going to reference our CG affine transform. This time we're going to do the dot identity. So this is going to kind of move it back down to where it had started. And then after this brace, let's go ahead and add that small bounce effect. And you can see how a lot of the method to this is, you know, we're going to animate these keyframes, and then we're adding the individual keyframes kind of this animation cycle. So let's have a 0.7 start time on this one, the relative duration, maybe 0.3. So this should last for a total of a second. We don't want these animations. Go ahead and add a brace, self.animated button, transform. And let's have this equal the CG affine transform over translation XY. Set this to be 0 and the Y to be -10. So this should add like a little bit of a bounce effect. Now, after this brace, we're going to come down to where our bracket ends. And if you need to find where this one ends on the animate keyframes, you can double click it. You can see that we have a bracket here on line 41 for me. We're going to add a comma, and we're going to have our completion be nil. And then, oh, for me, I need to fix this to say start animation, not star animation. And we should be good to go. So let's go to our main storyboard here on our view controller. Let's update the custom class to be for our keyframe view controller here. Let's update our simulator and let's see how this looks. All right, here's a little tap me button. We might want to change where this is, but that's totally fine. So what should happen is when we press the button, it should call upon our start of animation, and it should kind of go through the different, move this over. It should go through the different keyframes of ours. So it should move the button up and it should kind of bring it back, and then we're gonna kind of bounce a little bit. So let's press it, we move up, we move back down, and we kind of adjust a little bit. So this is a very basic animation that happens every time that we press this button. It kind of has this little bounce effect. So if you didn't want it to go up and down, right, we're just changing the Y values. If we were to change the X values, so maybe if we had this one be 50, actually let's change both the X and the Y. Let's kind of see how that looks. That might be pretty cool. And rerun our app. But you can see how you can kind of use these different transformations of the UI elements and create the different keyframes, add the individual keyframe of those animations, where you want it to go, how you want it to kind of react, and then you kind of have this cycle of animating and creating your own custom animations, which are really, really cool. So let's go ahead and tap this. It's flying off to the side now. So you can really see by playing around with these numbers, you don't even have to use .transform, right? There's lots of other different options that you have. You can even play around with things like the alpha, if it's hidden, enabled, right? And you can even kind of like hide things and have them flash. There's so many different options that you can really do with these animations that it's totally up to you. Play around with them. This is simply just an example to get you started with kind of moving some objects around. And if you really try, you can try to click on it while it's moving, but as it's kind of animating, I can no longer click on it, so it's not going to repeat those animations and kind of freak out. So keyframe animations allow for non-linear motion, bouncing, shaking, custom paths, and it adds more expressiveness than just standard animations. So let's explore some more custom animations. So if we go down here, let's create another file from template, our Cocoa Touch class, and let's do a UIViewPropertyAnimator. So unlike the UIView.animate, this gives us pause, scrub, or reverse animations dynamically. So let's go ahead and call this one PropertyAnimator. Wonderful, and you're going to notice a lot of different repeated concepts throughout this. So we're going to create an animated view, and this is going to equal a UI view. Nothing within those parameters. We're going to create a variable called animator, and this is going to conform to a UIViewPropertyAnimator. So this is a class that animates changes to views and allows for dynamic modification. We're also going to use our question mark here just to mark it as an optional. Alrighty, and let's also have a function here of setUpView. Let's go ahead and create that now. Function setUpView. Parameters, add a brace here, as we're going to have our animated view dot frame. And let's have this also be a CG rectangle, and this is going to have an X height and all those things. Just kind of using some arbitrary numbers here, but I want to make sure that it's kind of like a decent size. So 100x, 300y, 150 height and width. And in our animated view, let's go ahead and add a background color. We'll have this one just be .red. And then in our view.add subview, we're going to go ahead and call upon that animated view so the viewers can see it. And we'll have a pan gesture. And this is going to go ahead and equal a UI pan gesture recognizer. And we can actually choose the one with the target and the action. So for the target, it's just going to be itself. And then for the action, we're going to use our hashtag selector. And from here, I'm actually going to do a custom function. I'm going to be calling it handle pan. On the next line, we're going to have our animated view. On the next line, we'll have our animated view dot add gesture recognizer. Because we're going to be doing a custom pan gesture, we should probably, have that recognizer be for said pan gesture. Alrighty, and just like with before, let's go ahead and create our objc and function handle pan. Wow, I'm really bad at spelling today. Good thing I noticed it. I keep missing a letter. Then with star animation, I'm like, I forgot the E in handle pan too. Okay. All right, within our brackets here, we're going to be referencing an underscore gesture. And this is going to conform to the UI pan gesture recognizer. Go ahead and add our braces, and we'll have something called progress. So let progress equals gesture.translation in. This is where we're going to reference the view. Outside of these brackets, we're going to do the .x /view.bounds.width. Awesome, and now let's create a switch statement for our gesture.state. So for the first case, this is when it just began. So we'll do .begin, and we're going to have our animator equal UIViewPropertyAnimator. And from here, we can include the different properties. So I would suggest doing the duration and curve, and this is a kind of built-in UIKit timing curve. So for the duration, let's set this to be 1.0. You can always play around with it after if we're not happy with it. In our curve, this is where we can use different built-in animations. So I'm going to do the .ease in. Actually, no, let's do the .ease in out. That might be a little bit better. We can play around with them. Then we're going to add a comma, and we're going to include our custom animations now. So we're going to add a brace here and add some space. And we're going to have our self.animated view.transform equals CG transform. And for this one, let's try rotation angle. And let's have this be .pi. Wonderful. And outside of the brace and bracket, we'll have our animator question mark. dot pause animation, and this is going to start paused. Next, we'll add some more cases, and for this one, we'll call it dot changed. And these are pretty cool because these are all kind of built-in cases for gestures, which is really handy for us. So we're going to now have our animator question mark dot fraction complete. So this is the completion percentage of the animation. And this is going to go ahead and reference the ABS, so the absolute value of a given number. And then within the brackets, we're going to reference our progress. So this is going to allow us to control the progress of our kind of pan gesture dynamically. We'll then have another case for ended. We'll have our animator question mark dot continue animation with timing parameters. For this one, I'm just going to set it to be nil, and during the factor, we can just set this to be 0. It's done. I don't want it to spin anymore. We'll go ahead and add our default, and in this case, it's just going to break. We're going to get out of the case. Alrighty, let's go to our storyboard here, and let's update this one to be the property animator view controller, and let's see this one in action. Okay, so when we first initialize this view, we're just creating this kind of square, you know, the 150 by 150 should be good to go. It's red. And now we are going to press and pan on the square. So panning is moving kind of left and right. We can kind of see that we're able to rotate it. Now, because on the dot ended, this thing is no longer going to be moving, but the first time that we kind of press and interact with this object and pan it, it's going to be moving around, but when it's done, it is done. So on the dot ended, you can either choose to complete it. Otherwise, because we've completed the entire progress of this, it is done animating. So let's go ahead and run that again, see it in action. Okay, this time I'm just going to kind of touch it a little bit and then let go. And you'll see that it does the full rotation. That's why we're using pi. So even though it's a square, it kind of still does that full circle of the rotation of the animation. You can change these cases to better match your app. For me, I just have it run once. We can kind of see that it rotates fully, and then it's done after the pan gesture. These are meant to kind of be examples, so you can kind of say, oh, okay, that's how that works. I'm going to play around with it on my own. So why are we using the UIVieWPropertyAnimator? So this lets us control animations interactively. So great for any scroll gestures, moving of objects, and you can pause, reverse, or scrub animations for much more engagement. All right, next let's explore CoreAnimation. CoreAnimations run on the main thread, but CoreAnimations run in the GPU, making it even faster. Let's go ahead and create a new file from template here, Cocoa Touch class. Let's call this one CoreAnimation View Controller. And we'll have this one be like a glow view. I don't think we've done that one. So let glowing view equals UIView. The parameters, we're going to set up view within the function did load. We're also going to create another function eventually called start pulsing animation. All right, let's create our first function here of setting up the view. Shouldn't need to do anything within those parameters. Add our brace. And let's have our glowing view that we referenced above, dot frame, equals CG bricked, XY height. So the exact same we did before. I think that's where we had kind of put it. And our width, let's do 150 by 150. Let's then add a corner radius. So dot layer dot corner radius equals 50. And we'll add a background color. It's glowing view dot background color equals, let's do dot system background. Actually, let's do system blue so it stands out. Let's go ahead and add this to our view. So view dot add subview, glowing view, perfect. Outside of this function, this is where we'll create our start pulsing animation. Empty brackets, and let's add our brace. So we're going to establish a pulse animation. So let pulse animation equals, we're going to set this to be a CA basic animation. And I'm going to choose the one with the key path. So this creates and returns a CA property animation instance for a specified key path. We're going to call this transform dot scale. Wrap that string up. Then we're going to have our pulse animation here. dot toValue equals 1.2. You can play around with this. And then we're going to add our pulse animation dot duration, be 0.8. Play around with this number, of course, as well. And we can actually use the dot auto reverse to kind of determine if the receiver plays in the reverse upon completion, to kind of like repeating it, like a GIF. Let's set this to be true. And if we want it to repeat forever, well, let's do the pulse animation dot repeat count. And we're going to have this equal dot infinity. It'll never stop. Well, unless the view is kind of gone, then of course it will. And then we're going to add our glowing view dot layer. We're going to add, so dot add our pulse animation for key. I'm going to set this one to be pulse. All right, let's go ahead and attach this to our storyboard. Let's see it in action. Let's call this one CoreAnimation View Controller. So why are we using CoreAnimation? Well, this offloads the animation to the GPU, making it buttery smooth. It also handles complex animations efficiently. Great for particle effects. And we can see here, this is just running and repeating forever. It's kind of pulsing like someone was breathing. You can see it's kind of just in, out, repeating forever, kind of like a GIF or GIF, we like to say it. All right, and last but not least, I'm going to show you the gesture animation that I started off with at the beginning. So let's create one more new file from template, Cocoa Touch class. Let's call this one GestureAnimation. We're going to create a card view here. It's kind of like the card that we are moving. So let card view equals UIView. Might be good if you're trying to like recreate a Tinder app or something. We want to have the cards that the user can gesture and swipe away, up to you. And in our function, we're going to go ahead and set up the card. Create that function, set up card, nothing within those brackets. And this is where we're going to have our card view dot frame. You'll notice a lot of repeating kind of themes here. I'm going to for X, Y, height. Set this one all the way at 600, width, let's do 300 by 200. Always play around with these values, make them your own. Our card view dot background color. Let's have this equal dot red. Actually, you know what? I haven't done a purple in a while. I love a purple moment. And let's add this view dot add subview of our card view. Cool. And let's go ahead and have our pan gesture one more. So let pan gesture equals UI pan gesture recognizer target. It's gonna be self. We want it to be that kind of card view, and the action hashtag selector handle pan card view dot add gesture recognizer pan gesture. Let's add our at objc like we did before, function handle pan in our brackets underscore gesture. UI pan gesture recognizer, add a brace. So we'll create our translation here. So translation equals gesture. And this is where we want that UI pan gesture. All right, let's now establish the translation. So like kind of how we're moving things. So translation equals gesture dot translation in. And because we're just kind of focusing on the view itself, we don't want to move the entire screen. We don't want to move any other objects. We're just going to be focusing on the view of this square that we've created, or this card in this case. And here's where we're going to create an if statement. So we're going to basically say, okay, if it's changed, just move the Y value, just keep updating it. If it's stopped, so in the case of it's like ended, we're no longer interacting with it, I want it to kind of fall back to where it started. We're going to use that identity like we did with the bouncing button. So if gesture dot state, this is how we can kind of, just like with the switch statement, control its different spots. Equals equals dot changed. We then add our brace for the code here. Our card view dot transform equals the CGFine transform of our translation X and Y I only want this one to move up and down on the y value again. So the x is going to be 0, and the y value is just going to be the translation.y. So that's basically saying allow the user to move it anywhere they want on the y-axis while we're changing the value, while we're kind of interacting with it, right? Outside of this if statement, we're going to go ahead and add an else if, add a brace, gesture.state equals dot ended. So when the user's done interacting with this, let's go ahead and have our UIView.animate with duration. And I'm also going to select the one with the animations here. So with the duration of 0.5, so after a 0.5 second delay, we're going to take away that void. Instead, we're going to add an opening brace, hit return. Then we're going to have our self.curveView.transform equals dot identity. So this should bring it back down to where it had started. So this is going to create an interactive and fluid UI that people can interact with. And then it also has the animations built into it as well. Good for cards, menus, and any transition effects. Oh, let's go ahead and attach it to our view controller here. We still have the pulsating one. So we had called this one GestureAnimation view controller. Let's go ahead and run that real quick. All right, we have our purple square, so we can see we can move around it. And as long as the user's kind of interacting with it, we're good to go. But if we let go, we can see that it kind of falls down. And the cool thing is, it's always going to fall down with a half-second delay. So if I drop it from all the way up here, I'm kind of pulling it off the screen, it really falls down really rapidly. But if I slightly move it above, notice it kind of falls down slower. So whatever the duration is here, so if we go back to our gesture animation, so the duration of 0.5, it's always going to go back to the same position after 0.5 seconds. If we set this to be 2 and rerun our app, it'll be much more noticeable. So it's going to fall over 2 seconds. And if we drop it from here, it's going to move at a snail's pace, right? So this is something that you can play around with. You can have those static animation times when it's falling back. This makes your app look so much more fluid. So let's talk a little bit about what we learned today. Keyframe animations. So these are great for the bounces and custom movements where you're kind of defining some steps, making those custom animations. The UIViewPropertyAnimator. So this lets us control the animations interactively. We had our CoreAnimations for those high performance effects that run on the GPU, and particle effects, pulsating effects, things like that, as well as our gesture-driven animations, which allowed users to interact and based on those events. We had those animations play out. So some next steps for you would be to try chaining animations for even smoother transitions, experiment with spring animations for a more natural feel, especially when we're talking about like gestures. Maybe this starts in the middle of the screen. As we pull away, it'll kind of like bounce back into position. That might be something that's cool. As well as trying to build a custom interactive menu using gestures and animations. So like, comment, and subscribe if you found this useful. And also comment below, what was your favorite animation effect, or how do you plan to use this in an application of your own? Dream big, code bigger, and I hope you had fun learning more about animations and a little bit more about gestures as well. Take care, everyone.